I remember as a kid growing up being told constantly, chew with your mouth closed. All right. I was like constantly, just my dad and my mother were just constantly on it. Right. Well, it turned into an obsession to me. And I had to pay, this is probably a crazy example, but I had to like notice. So fast forward into my home life. And this is also what I wanted to bring a point to say. Your agitations get taken home more so than anywhere. When, you know, with your kids, with your wife, because you see them at all moments.
Yeah.
How they brush their teeth, how they leave things on the nightstand, how they leave their clothes, what your kids are doing. And at the dinner table, I would hear the chewing, and it still does bother me to a certain degree because it's a manners thing.
No, because you're misophonic.
Because of what?
You're misophonic.
I don't know what that is.
Okay. So, and this is probably also got to do with your upbringing and also exacerbated by the fact that you were deployed. Right.
Yeah.
So misophonic means that any consistent noise, even the most subtle one. So if you're me sitting here, I do this.
You're correct.
Right. And I just bang on the wall like as soon as you hear that tip, it drives you nuts.
It does. That's funny you say that because when I took my test to get in the military, there was a kid doing this the whole time.
Yeah. Drove you nuts.
Well, I can't concentrate.
Yes.
It takes my concentration to that. And so I struggled in my test. I ended up passing fine, but like it was such a bad distraction for me. I've gotten better with that. I'm still... Yeah, but there's other things.
The point I'm making is so you're misophonic. It just means that you're very, very disrupted by any type of noise outside the norm, which could be loud chewing, just chew. It doesn't even have to be loud chewing. Just be chewing, right? Those noises would affect you. But even though that there's a literal condition for that.
Is there?
Despite the condition, you still look at that and you go, but... You know, who am I to...
Well, and that's what came full circle for me, right? Yeah. So, like, I did recognize, and I would play music to try to overcome it to a certain degree. Like, when we would sit down to eat, I'd always play, like, a music thing or something on the TV in the background. But my point is, I would let these agitations come out.
Yes.
And I would have to identify, like, what was going on with this? Why did I act this way? Why does that get to me? And I'm way better than I've ever been. Because of all the deep work that I've done, all the different things I've dove into. And I guess like what I'm ultimately trying to say to people is like when these things come up, when these agitations occur, it's oftentimes at home and it's with our loved ones. And it's the worst place that you could have them.
Always.
Right? Because I can't do it at work because I'm going to get fired.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to lose my paycheck.
And
right?
I know I can kind of do it at home and take advantage and kind of beat on my spouse.
They're always going to be there. They're not going away. But the reality is like, and we've had this conversation, a spouse's love is not unconditional.
Nope.
It's just not. And I don't care what anybody says about that. Like it can very much go away if you don't, you got to think like, and Jordan Peterson talked about this. Like if you keep just at these negative toxic traits and behaviors, eventually they're going to be like, I'm done. I'm out.
100%. And this, I think it was Dave Chappelle, Chris Rock, one of the two said this, right? And they're on point. The only two things in this world that have true unconditional love are babies and puppies.
Yeah, I agree.
Right? Babies and puppies. And to a point, I'd say maybe dogs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Only thing that gets unconditional love is, you might say that men love women unconditionally. That's not true. That's 100% not true, right? Mm-hmm. And, I've had this discussion with my spouse. And initially when I said it, she kind of looked at me. I go, it's not unconditional. I go, as your husband, as the person in your significant life is, you met me a certain way, I've grown with you a certain way. If I tomorrow decide I don't care about myself, I start drinking beer, laying on the couch, stop working, stop bringing money, I guarantee you, I'm not saying that, and when I say unconditional, right, there's a difference between being in love with someone and loving someone. Yes. I can love someone and not like what they do.
Yep.
I can't be in love with someone, right, unless I had that connection. And I said to her, so it's going to be conditional on how I am as a man in your life. If I break those levels, of course there's going to be conditions on that because I wouldn't put up with that. Why would you?
Well, and that causes me to think about the agitation component of this too. So if every day I come home agitated, and I live this firsthand, so I can speak to this with credibility, like if every day I come home with agitations and irritations, whether it be my job, whether it be other people, whatever it is, and I'm constantly just negative and complaining, and then I got critical of my loved one, right? Yeah. And I got like kind of critical towards them, and that was
for really superficial reasons.
Yeah, and it became so much of a detriment that one day I found myself in the place of like, I don't know how much longer I'm going to be married.
Yeah.
And I had to really decide, wait a second. I had to look myself in the mirror and realize I was the problem.
Yeah.
Well, the beauty of that, and I've heard other influencers say this, so I'm not going to take credit for this. I learned it because of it. I said, well, if I was the problem, I can also be the solution.
Yes.
So if I can be the one to make the change, if I was the problem, I can be the one to make the change. And that was the quest that I went on. And I started to really dive into it. I had conversations with my parents. I had conversations with my wife. I've had conversations with my children, right? Because they're small and they're young. I've had endless conversations with you about stuff. And I ultimately owned every last bit of it, probably to a fault, to a certain degree, too far, but I did. I just owned it because in the end, I realized that my agitations were so endless and so bothersome that what way to live is that?
The thing is, they're not conducive to a good life, right? Because if everything in the world's going to bother you, then you're not going to find beauty in anything in the world.
Yeah.
Right.
And to be fair, like I really believe, and there's a lot of studies that have shown this, like veterans come back after deployments with all out of whack hormones.
Yeah.
And my hormones were all kind of out of whack.
That plays a different factor in it.
It does, but then there's also underlying, traumas from childhood. But like my testosterone was like 207, so it was very low. And what I've learned about testosterone is it also balances your moods.
Yep.
And if your testosterone's low like that, you're gonna have dramatic mood swings.
Yes.
And it's very abrupt. It's out of nowhere, and you need to address that. And then you start to dive into the brain, and you start to do something about it physically, and following a meal plan and nutrition and fitness and all that kind of stuff. You do all these deep efforts, and then you can start to really overcome this stuff. And it takes time. It doesn't happen overnight.
No, it's never ending.
It's never.
It's once you've flipped the switch and you've taken the first steps, and that may be an LP hypnosis, it may be a dietary change, it may be a nutrition program, it might be all encompassing.
Yep.
Once you've decided to make that change, you've just started.
Yeah.
The work doesn't end. That's
right.
That's not where the trophy comes. You go, hey, I won. You haven't won shit.
True.
Now you have this progressive targets, never-ending targets that you have to hit, and some of them are small daily targets, some of them are big targets, but they're never ending.
To me, there's no end. There is no end.
There is.
The end is death.
The goal.
Your
is
time on this earth expired. That's the end.
And while you're here and you're in the present, you want to be the most productive, the most grounded, the best version of yourself you can possibly be.
That's right.
This is the goal.
Yeah.
And in that goal there's no prize. The prize is the journey.
It is.
The prize is going and getting through that and going, wow, I'm doing this. That's the prize.